Welcome to part 4 of the original 6 celebration. In the last video, I discussed the history of the big and bad Boston Bruins. I would appreciate it if you watched that video as well as my other 2 so far. However, you don't have to watch them in order, so you might as well stay and watch this one first.
Today, the team that I will be discussing holds residence in the Big Apple. Yes, New York City's finest, the New York Rangers, will be our stars of today's episode. They may be the most recognizable team in the NHL, or at least the most recognized American franchise. So, without any more stalling, let's dissect New York's primary hockey team. The New York Rangers are, as I said in the intro, thought of as New York's main hockey franchise. However, they were not the first team to call New York home, as the New York Americans were brought to the NHL a season before in 1925-26. They would play out of Madison Square Garden, and the president of that arena, George Louis Tex Rickard, would see their success and want in on the NHL. So, despite his promises that the Americans would be the only team to play out of Madison Square Garden, Rickard was granted the franchise on April 17, 1926.
During the meeting in which the Rangers were founded, they were originally to be named the New York Giants Professional Hockey Club. That, of course, would not be their name. The name that was chosen was ultimately the New York Rangers. Why, you may ask? Well, George Daly, who was a sports editor for the New York Herald Tribune, used the term Texas Rangers when referring to the team. He called them that because Tex Rickard was the team's owner, but also it was a funny play on words, making the name sound like Texas Rangers. So, not sure what Rangers had to do with New York, but I guess the name was funny at the time.
Additionally, the team would debut jerseys and a logo that have stayed pretty much the same throughout time. The colors of the team were blue, red, and white, which has stayed true today, and the crest was a shield with a diagonal slash that contained the team's name. Their jerseys would not feature this logo, though, instead opting for the diagonal lettering of the team's moniker, Rangers. The jerseys were blue with red and white stripes. While the team has had jersey changes, they have mostly stayed true to their first design.
During this time period in NHL history, there was no such thing as an expansion draft, making it hard for expansion teams to compete out of the gate. However, with the fall of the Western Hockey League, or the WHL, the Rangers would have a chance to ice a competitive team in year one, as they bought some of the best remaining players in the WHL that had not already been scooped up. This master plan was the thinking of Conn Smythe, who you may remember from the Toronto Maple Leafs video. Unfortunately for Smythe, after a falling out with Cole John S. Hammond, he was fired as manager-coach the day before the Rangers would begin their first ever season. Talk about a rough way to go out. With that said, Smythe's genius worked out, as the team finished the season as the winners of the American Division title, and while they lost in the playoffs to the Boston Bruins, the team looked poised to win out of the gate. Their success even made them somewhat of celebrities in New York City during the Roaring '20s. They also earned the nickname the Broadway Blue Shirts around this time due to how close in proximity Madison Square Garden was to Times Square.
The Rangers continued to win, and win even more, as in their second season they hoisted the Stanley Cup for the first time in franchise history. They defeated the Montreal Maroons 3-2 in the finals, with one of the most iconic moments being when Rangers head coach Lester Patrick, who was 44 years old by the way, played goalie for the team in Game 2. After Rangers goaltender Lauren Chabot sustained an eye injury and Maroons head coach Eddie Girard vetoed against Ottawa Senators goalie Alex Connell, who was in attendance for the game, replacing Lauren, Patrick suited up and guarded the crease for 2 periods. What's crazy is he only let up 1 goal, and the Rangers would win the game in overtime on a Frank Bouchard goal.
The Rangers would then make it back to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1929, yet lost to the Boston Bruins. That was followed by some mediocre seasons in the 1930s and another finals loss in 1932, this time to the Toronto Maple Leafs. However, led by players like center Frank Bouchard and 2 brothers in Bill and Bun Cook, who played right and left wing respectively, the Rangers won their second Stanley Cup in 1933, getting revenge on those pesky Maple Leafs from the prior season in the finals. The Rangers would then play the rest of the 1930s at a mediocre level, as they played close to .500 hockey. Eventually, Lester Patrick retired and was replaced by former player and franchise legend Frank Bouchard, who would take on the reins of the team. In the 1939-40 season, the Rangers would yet again be a good team, as they finished second in the league standings only behind the Boston Bruins. That Bruins team would face them in round 1 and take a 2-1 series lead. However, the Rangers responded and won 3 straight games, taking the series 4-2 and advancing straight to the finals. This also gave the Rangers a bye of sorts, while the other teams messed around on the other side of the playoffs. The Detroit Red Wings and Toronto Maple Leafs would emerge victorious in their series over the New York Americans and Chicago Blackhawks, respectively, to face each other. The Maple Leafs would sweep the Red Wings for a date with our stars, the Rangers. In Game 1 at MSG, the Rangers would win in overtime, but they had a much easier time in Game 2, winning 6-2. However, you can't count out those Maple Leafs, who would take both games in Toronto, tying the series at 2. But ultimately, the Rangers would win games 5 and 6 to win their 3rd Stanley Cup. That concludes the early era of Rangers hockey. So now, onto a new era, one where the Rangers struggled heavily. Thankfully, there isn't much to talk about, as I'm sure Rangers fans would rather sweep the original Six era under the rug. The Rangers were pretty horrendous by the mid-1940s. Here's a fun fact. They won 41 games out of 200 played from 1942 to 1946. Just 41. That is horrible. In 1943-44, the team experienced their worst season, going 639-5, the franchise's worst ever record. Goaltender Ken McAuley posted a 6.24 goals against average, GAA, in 50 games played. That is shockingly atrocious, and it gets worse, as one of those games was a 15-0 loss to the Detroit Red Wings. That remains today as the most consecutive goals scored by one team in a single game in NHL history. The Rangers missed 5 consecutive postseasons, and when they made it as the final team in 1947-48, they were eliminated in round 1, before missing the playoffs again the next season.
The Rangers would make the Stanley Cup Finals in 1950, so this era wasn't all doom and gloom. However, it was a very weird Stanley Cup Final, as the Rangers had to play all of their home games in Toronto due to the circus being in town in New York, meaning it would be occupying Madison Square Garden. Talk about not having your priorities straight, because if MSG management really chose the circus over the team with a chance to win a championship, then I don't know what they were thinking, but it must have been crazy. The Rangers would unfortunately lose the series in overtime of Game 7 against the Detroit Red Wings, so maybe the circus idea was the right call. Or, and hear me out, maybe the Rangers would have won the cup if they got to play in front of their fans. Just a thought, though.
The Rangers would then continue their struggles throughout the 1950s and 1960s, missing the playoffs and finishing last in the league on multiple occasions. Thankfully, though, things would soon get better.
The Rangers missed 12 of the next 16 postseasons after 1950, but were rejuvenated in the late 1960s. This was symbolized by the team's move into a new Madison Square Garden in 1968. Yep, I bet you didn't know that there were 2 MSGs. The Rangers would begin to turn the corner again, and even make 2 Stanley Cup Finals in the 1970s. Of course, they lost both of them, but you have to cut them some slack. They lost in 6 games to a Bruins team led by Phil Esposito and Bobby Orr in 1972. And in 1979, they lost in 5 to a Montreal Canadiens team led by Guy Lafleur, Larry Robinson, and Ken Dryden. Those are 2 powerhouse teams, so it's no shock that the Rangers lost those series.
In 1973-74, the Rangers would play in a legendary semifinal with the Philadelphia Flyers, as in Game 7, a fight between Dale Rolfe of the Rangers and Dave Schultz of the Flyers occurred, where Schultz beat the brakes off Rolfe. However, no Rangers player stepped in, likely due to the GAG line being on the ice, or the goal game line, consisting of John Rattel, Vic Hadfield, and Rod Gilbert. This made people see the Rangers as a soft team.
The embarrassment would only get worse for the Rangers, as they would face the New York Islanders in the first round of the 1974-75 playoffs. The Islanders had to pay a huge territorial fee of somewhere in the $4 million range to the Rangers to even play in New York. They were instated in 1972-73, but what's important is that they defeated the established Rangers organization in that first round, 11 seconds into overtime in the decisive Game 3. That set up a rivalry that would grow and blossom for the ensuing decades, even standing today.
Moving forward a bit, the Rangers would remain competitive in the 1980s and the early 1990s, even making the playoffs every year save for one. Yet, they would never go very far. The one exception would really be 1985-86, where they beat the Patrick Division winning Flyers in 5 games and the Washington Capitals in 6 games in the Patrick Division Finals. The team did this behind rookie goalie John Van Beesbroek. However, they lost to the Canadiens in the World's Conference Finals. Coincidentally, a team that also was led by their own rookie goalie in Patrick Waugh. The very next season, the Rangers would acquire Marcel Dion, a league superstar who played with the Los Angeles Kings for basically the past 12 seasons. Unfortunately, in a trend that will continue later on, the Rangers acquired him while he was already nearing the twilight of his career, as he would retire in 1989. But in 1988, he took the temporary second-place spot in career goals scored, which is cool. As you can see, the Rangers had struggled for a while up to this point. The fans of this team believed this was the curse of 1940. How was this curse caused, exactly? Well, the fans had 2 reasons for the potential spell that was placed on the franchise. The first was when Rangers management burnt their mortgage to Madison Square Garden in the bowl of the Stanley Cup. The second is that Red Dutton had cursed the franchise after the collapse of the New York Americans, the team he had coached and had been the general manager for. Dutton, who was bitter about losing the team, said the Rangers would never win a Stanley Cup in his lifetime. He was correct too. Maybe there was a curse on the team after all.
Things just kept getting more disappointing in New York, until the peak in 1991-92, when the Rangers won the President's Trophy. That meant they were the best regular season team in the league. So what could possibly be the bad part here? Well, the Rangers went up 2-1 in a series with the defending champion Pittsburgh Penguins. So good, right? Okay, here's where everything changes, as the team would lose 3 straight to lose the series 4-2. The turning point of the series was when Penguins player Ron Francis took a slap shot from the blue line that got past Rangers goaltender Mike Richter. However, things would get even worse, as the Rangers did not even make the playoffs in 1992-93 after a 1-11 finish and numerous injuries banished them to become bottom feeders in the Patrick Division. Obviously, coach Roger Nielsen was fired, but the controversy and frustration doesn't end yet. The Rangers hired Mike Keenan as the next head coach, a hire that was criticized because Keenan had an 0-3 record in the Stanley Cup Finals. You will soon learn this hire was not so bad after all.
Finally, it is important that I note the ownership of the Rangers at the time. They were owned by Gulf Plus Western, which was renamed to Paramount Communications in 1989. The team was then sold to Viacom in 1994, who in turn sold the team to ITT Corporation and Cablevision. ITT then sold all of their stock to Cablevision, who owns the team today in the form of the Dolan family. So, the Rangers vastly improved in this era, but the results remained the same. They were one of the NHL's most recognizable brands. They could acquire any player they wanted, and yet, for the life of them, they could not win. However, things would soon change, and when I say soon, think 1 year soon.
The key to ending the curse was simple. Take ex-Edmonton Oilers players onto the team. Okay, I'm partly joking, but there is some truth to it. In the 1993-94 season, the Rangers won the President's Trophy with a 52-24-8 record and a franchise record 112 points. That led to their capturing of the inaugural Atlantic Division title. But back to my point. The team would house multiple Oilers players that season, and they had already acquired star center Mark Messier 2 years earlier, who was with the Edmonton Oilers when they won the Stanley Cup multiple times. The Rangers also acquired Adam Graves, another ex-Oilers player. They also had Esa Tinkinen, Craig McTavish, and Glenn Anderson on the roster. You want to know a fun fact? They were also all former Oilers. This season, Graves set a team record with 52 goals, which broke the old record of 50 goals held by Vic Hadfield.
So, the Rangers cruised to the playoffs, but that doesn't matter. What did they do when they got there? Did they continue to disappoint? Or did the Rangers break through? Well, starting in round 1 of the 1994 Stanley Cup playoffs, the team beat the New York Islanders in a sweep. They followed that with a 5-game series victory over the Washington Capitals. That sent the Rangers to the conference finals, where they had a date with their intense rivals in the Hudson River rivalry, the New Jersey Devils.
The Rangers lost Game 1 in double overtime in Madison Square Garden, but fortunately, they bounced back and took the next 2 games. However, the Devils would not go out easy, as they were still a powerhouse at the time and soon to be a dynasty. So, they took both Game 4 and Game 5, winning 3-1 and 4-1 respectively. The series headed back to the Meadowlands for Game 6 with the Rangers' backs to the wall. But Captain Mark Messier, revered as one of the best captains in NHL history, guaranteed the team would win. Messier made sure that his guarantee would be delivered, as he scored 3 goals in the third period for a 4-2 Rangers win, forcing a Game 7 at MSG. In that game, Stéphane Matteau scored the series-winning goal in double overtime, sending the Rangers to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1979.
The Rangers would face the Vancouver Canucks in the Stanley Cup Finals, who were on a storybook run themselves. In fact, the Canucks would take Game 1 in New York off a Greg Adams overtime winner. However, the Rangers would respond, winning the next 3 games and only allowing the Canucks 4 goals in that span. The Rangers would give themselves a chance to win the Stanley Cup at home in Game 5. Did that happen? No. The Canucks would lead 3-0 in the third period of Game 5, and while the Rangers tied it up halfway through that period, a goal 29 seconds later led the Canucks to a 6-3 win. Suddenly, the Canucks had some momentum, and won 4-1 at home in Game 6, setting up a Game 7. Keenan said the players were confident, but how confident can you really be after blowing a 3-1 lead?
Game 7. It's the best game in sports, and this particular Game 7 was one to remember. The Rangers went up 2-0 in the first period thanks to Brian Leetch and Adam Graves. However, Canucks captain Trevor Linden would cut that lead to 1 goal. However, fear not, as Captain Courageous himself, Mark Messier put the Rangers up 3-1, and while Trevor Linden would score again for Vancouver, Messier's goal would stand as the winner, as the Rangers won 3-2 and Madison Square Garden erupted with both cheers and tears, which makes sense for such an emotional moment. The 1994 Stanley Cup Finals was one of the most iconic of all time. The pictures with Messier leaping after winning the cup, as well as him receiving the cup, are some of the most memorable pictures in NHL history. Messier became the first and only player to captain 2 teams to the Stanley Cup, as he also did it with the Edmonton Oilers in 1990. On top of that, Brian Leetch became the first American-born player to win the Conn Smythe, and also the first non-Canadian to win it. Oh yeah, and Mike Keenan, who was horrible in the finals, he avoided becoming the first coach to lose in Game 7 with 2 different teams in the finals. And with that, the curse was ended. Really, all it took was the Oilers' scraps. In all seriousness, the heart this Rangers team displayed was more than any other team the organization has ever iced, so it makes sense why they won.
After winning the cup, Coach Keenan left due to disputes with GM Neil Smith. After that, the Rangers began to descend into the depths of the NHL standings. It wasn't an immediate fall-off, as they still made the playoffs for the first few seasons after Keenan's departure. The Rangers' main tactic in these years was to sign every star player they could find. Yeah, that included the greatest player of all time in Wayne Gretzky. However, this wasn't prime Gretzky, and while he was still great, he clearly was no longer as good as he was when he was in his 20s. He did bring the Rangers to the 1997 Eastern Conference Finals, yet they lost 4-1 to the Philadelphia Flyers. The Rangers attempted to bring in Joe Sakic from the Colorado Avalanche, but that never came to fruition.
The fact of the matter was, the Rangers' stars from their cup win, along with Gretzky, were just getting older, and the team would begin a 7-year postseason drought in 1997-98. The likes of Pavel Bure and Eric Lindros, players that the Rangers brought in to help, could not fix the team, as spending the most money in the league does not necessarily lead to success. So, in March 2000, Glenn Saffer would replace Neil Smith as GM, leading to the Rangers' inevitable rebuild and change of strategy. The rebuild would begin after the 2003-04 season, with Saffer trading Brian Leetch and Alexei Kovalov, among many others. On top of that, Mark Messier and Pavel Bure retired, while Eric Lindros left for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Truly, a new era of Rangers hockey was beginning. With that said, one veteran remained. That was Jaromir Jagr, who was still a superstar at that point. Nonetheless, the franchise still moved to an overall younger squad. The Rangers were not expected to be good at all in 2005-06, but they surprised a lot of people, going 44-26-12 and making the playoffs. Jagr was a huge factor here, as he broke the record for most points in a season for the team when he recorded his 110th point on March 29, 2006. Then, on April 8th, he recorded his 53rd goal for the record for most goals in a season. So yeah, Jagr was a big factor in the success of the team. But another big one was a rookie goaltender named Henrik Lundqvist. Well, just a rookie now. His name would soon be known around the league as one of the best goalies of all time. While the season was great for him and the Rangers, they were swept in round 1 by the Devils, being outscored 17-4. Lundqvist was not great in the series, with a 4.25 GAA, and Jagr was battling injuries throughout the series, leading him to miss Game 2 and most of Game 4. The Rangers would build off the success of this season for the next couple seasons, and while they never went too far, they were consistently a playoff team. To start the 2006-07 season, Jagr was named the first captain since Messier on October 5, 2006. The Rangers, over the course of these few seasons of success, would sign many veteran players who used to be great, as they did not learn from their previous mistakes. Players like Chris Drury, who would become captain of the team on October 3, 2008, Brendan Shanahan, and Scott Gomez all joined the team on pretty substantial deals.
After a few disappointing playoff exits, the team would bring in superstar and Marian Gaborik in 2009 to hopefully help the team finally make a deep run, and hopefully recapture Lord Stanley. They also acquired a great defenseman in Ryan McDonough. Unfortunately, these moves somehow didn't work out, as the Rangers missed the playoffs in the 2009-10 season. It was not to the fault of Gaborik, as he recorded 86 points, of which 42 were goals. The Rangers' playoff miss was heartbreaking, as they missed the playoffs on the final day of the season, in a match with the Flyers where the winner would get into the postseason. The Flyers won the game 2-1 in the shootout, thus ending the Rangers' season.
In 2010-11, the Rangers introduced the Heritage third jersey on November 12 at the rink at Rockefeller Center in New Jersey. It was a special ceremony, with Rangers alumni and current players discussing the history of the Broadway Blue Shirts. The jersey was first used on November 17th in a game versus the Boston Bruins at MSG.
The Rangers would make it back to the playoffs in 2010-11, yet again having their season come down to the final day of the season, where the Carolina Hurricanes luckily lost, allowing the Rangers into the postseason. I mean, it didn't really matter, as the Capitals beat the team in 5 games. But hey, at least they made it that year. In the 2011-12 season, the Rangers would finally achieve some success in the postseason. Before that, though, they geared up, signing Brad Richards and named him as an alternate captain with Mark Stahl. Who was the captain? It was Ryan Callahan, who would be the 26th captain in Rangers history. The teams had atop the East at the end of the year, with 109 points and a 51-24-7 record. Gaborik continued his strong play with 41 goals and 76 points, and yet, somehow, the Rangers lost the President's Trophy battle to the Canucks. It's a good thing that the trophy means nothing anyway.
In the playoffs, the team would go down to the Ottawa Senators in the first round, but they rallied to win the series in 7 games. The Rangers would face the Capitals in round 2 in an intense series. The Rangers took a 2-1 series lead off a Gaborik goal via Richards 14 minutes and 41 seconds into the third period. The Capitals were a resilient team, though, and they tied the series and were a few seconds away from the 3-2 series lead. However, the Capitals player Joel Ward took a high-sticking double minor penalty. That gave the Rangers a 4-minute power play, of which Brad Richards scored the game-tying goal with 6.6 seconds left. Then, a minute 35 seconds into overtime, Mark Stahl scored the winning goal and turned a 3-2 Capitals series lead into a 3-2 Rangers lead. The Rangers would go on to win the series in 7 games. That led the Rangers to their first Eastern Conference Finals appearance since 1997. They would face their division rivals in the New Jersey Devils. However, the Rangers lost in 6 games despite having a 2-1 series lead. Devils forward Adam Henrique scored the series-winning goal a minute and 3 seconds into overtime of Game 6.
It was unfortunate that such a great season didn't end with the Rangers lifting the Stanley Cup, but alas, that is just the way it goes sometimes. During the 2012-13 season, the Rangers enacted 2 major trades with the Columbus Blue Jackets, as they first traded for All-Star Rick Nash on July 23rd, and then traded Marian Gaborik for Derek Brassard and some other pieces at the NHL trade deadline on April 3rd. That didn't really help, as the team lost to the Bruins in the second round, costing coach John Tortorella his job. However, a deep run loomed in the very near future for the franchise. The Rangers traded their captain Ryan Callahan on March 5, 2014. Why? To acquire Martin St. Louis, who was also a captain, although he was with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Also because a contract could not be agreed upon with Callahan, but I digress. The Rangers won a franchise record 25 road games that year and punched their ticket back to the playoffs, where they beat the Flyers in 7 games in round 1 and followed that up with a 3-1 series comeback against the Pittsburgh Penguins to win in 7 games for the first time in franchise history. The Rangers then beat the Montreal Canadiens in 6 games, meaning they would go to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time in 20 years.
In the finals, the Rangers would match up with the Los Angeles Kings, a team who had recently won the Cup, winning in 2012. Despite leading the first 2 games, the Rangers would lose both in overtime. Then, they dropped Game 3 at Madison Square Garden in a 3-0 shutout. While the team won 2-1 and forced a Game 5 in Los Angeles, it did not matter, as they lost 3-2 in double overtime after Kings defenseman Alec Martinez scored with 5 minutes and 17 seconds remaining. It turned out that Henrik Lundqvist, despite his efforts, could not carry them all the way.
That leads us to the present day. On October 6, 2014, Ryan McDonough was named the 27th captain in team history, and the team won the President's Trophy with a 53-22-7 record and 113 points, setting the franchise record for wins and points. They also won their 7th division title in the new Metropolitan Division. During the playoffs, the Rangers defeated the Pittsburgh Penguins in 5 games in round 1, and yet again came back down 3-1 to win in 7 games in round 2, this time over the Capitals. This made them the first team to come back down 3-1 in consecutive NHL seasons. The Rangers faced the Lightning in the Eastern Conference Finals, and while they won Game 1, they lost Game 2 by 4 goals. With the series tied 2-2 heading into Game 5, Tampa Bay pulled out a 2-0 win. The Rangers survived in Game 6 off a Derek Brassard hat-trick in a 5-point game in a 7-3 victory. Then, the Rangers got shut out 2-0 at home, ending their season. A disappointing end, but nevertheless, a good year for the Blue Shirts.
Things then began to go downhill, as despite making the playoffs again in 2015-16, the team would lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins in 5 games in round 1. However, there was still hope with the team, as they still had Lundqvist and young forwards in JT Miller, Chris Kreider, Kevin Hayes, and Pavel Buchnevich, of which some had experience from the 2014 Stanley Cup Final. They also acquired Mika Zibanejad from the Ottawa Senators, a promising young player. And hey, in 2016-17, they beat the Canadiens in 6 games in round 1, before losing in 6 to the Senators in round 2. At least they had another 100-plus point regular season. This is where things take a turn, as the Rangers followed an overtime win over the Buffalo Sabres in the 2018 NHL Winter Classic by being atrocious and missing the playoffs with a 34-39-5 record. This was the first time they had missed the playoffs since 2010. Oh yeah, the team also released a letter to fans on February 7th informing them of their intention to rebuild after a 6-1 loss to Boston, which is just too funny. The Rangers traded fan favorites like McDonough, Miller, and Nash. However, the Rangers had 3 first-round picks, which were used on Vito Kravtsov, Keandre Miller, and Niels Lundqvist. The Rangers would then endure another painful season, as Hayes and Matt Zuccarello were traded and the team finished with a 32-36-14 record. But the team would get some key pieces after the season in Winnipeg Jets defenseman Jacob Trouba and Carolina Hurricanes defenseman prospect Adam Fox. And hey, they got lucky and moved up to the 2nd overall pick in the 2019 draft, selecting Cabo Caco, a Finnish winger oozing with potential. Then, the team acquired star player Artemi Panarin in free agency, who was coming from Columbus.
In the 2019-20 season, the team was alright, mostly due to Zibanejad, who had 41 goals, 5 of which came in an overtime win over the Capitals on March 5, 2020, and Panarin, who had tallied 95 points. The team had a 37-28-5 record on March 12, right before COVID-19 shut down the league. When the league returned with the expanded bubble playoffs in Toronto, the 11th-seeded Rangers faced the 6th-seeded Carolina Hurricanes in the Stanley Cup qualifiers, yet were swept. Then, with what can only be described as the best luck of all time, or a fix, the Rangers somehow won the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery, obtaining the first overall pick, where they would select Alexis Lafreniere, who was the next generational player. Or so we thought. The Rangers beat out 7 teams who did not even make the playoffs to get that pick. I still get mad that happened.
While the Rangers missed the playoffs in the 56 games shortened 2021 season, they had a respectable 27-23-6 record. On May 3rd, though, GM Jeff Gorton and President John Davidson were replaced by former Rangers player Chris Drury, who would take on both roles. In June of 2021, Gerard Gallant was named the new head coach, replacing David Quinn. During the offseason, the Rangers wanted to get more physical, so they added players like Barclay Goodrow, Ryan Reeves, and Sammy Blais, who they traded away from Buchnevich to the St. Louis Blues for. The Rangers were finally a good team again in 2021-22, which was helped with Kreider's breakthrough season with 52 goals and a new franchise goalie in Igor Shesterkin. The team went 52-24-6, and they added players like Andrew Kopp, Justin Braun, Tyler Mott, and Frank Vetrano. The team was down 3-1 in round 1 to the Penguins, but came back and won in 7 games, with the series winner coming in overtime from Panarin. The team then beat the Hurricanes in 7 games to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they lost in 6 games to the Lightning. While the end was disappointing, there was hope for the future.
In 2022-23, the team claimed the 3rd spot in their division with a 47-22-13 record, acquiring Vladimir Tarasenko, Nico Mikkola, and Patrick Kane at the trade deadline to hopefully help them with a deep playoff run. They lost in 7 games to the Devils in round 1, despite having a 2-0 series lead at one point. This led to Gallant's firing. He was replaced by Peter Laviolette.
So what happened in 2023-24? Did the Rangers regress more or experience another huge leap? Well, they won the President's Trophy with franchise records of 55 wins and 114 points, so I'd say they progressed. They also achieved their 3,000th win in franchise history, which made them the 5th team in the history of the NHL to do so. They also played in the 2024 NHL Stadium Series at MetLife Stadium, where they beat the Islanders 6-5 in overtime.
How did this translate into the playoffs, though? Well, they won their first 7 games, which was last done in 2008, so yeah, they were legit. It really seemed like this season was magical, with a sweep over the Capitals in round 1 and a 6-game series win over the Hurricanes in round 2. Then, they had a 2-1 series lead over the Florida Panthers in the Eastern Conference Finals, but they squandered that and lost the series 4-2. Alright, so they lost in the Conference Finals, again, but they're a good team and they're going to go deep again, right? Yeah, that's what you'd think, but the 2024-25 season was horrendous. They became the 4th team to miss the playoffs after winning the President's Trophy the previous year. Their star players were awful, with Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad specifically receiving criticism. On top of that, many players were traded, like Filip Chytil, Jacob Trouba, and Kaapo Kakko. But hey, they brought JT Miller back. He did not help. Peter Laviolette ended up being fired at the end of the season, and Kreider was traded to the Anaheim Ducks.
The Rangers' future is pretty bleak. Artemi Panarin, JT Miller, and Mika Zibanejad are still decent players, and might make one more playoff appearance, maybe 2. But they are all old. The defense is a little better, as Adam Fox is still in his prime, and Igor Shesterkin is arguably the best goalie in the league. However, they have 0 prospects and almost no good young players. All those draft picks, they did not work. Kakko was traded because he never lived up to his potential, which was the Rangers' developmental system's fault. Keandre Miller and Chytil showed promise, but have taken steps back. In Chytil's defense, though, he has had so many injuries. Finally, the star of these disappointments, Alexis Lafreniere. He just has not lived up to that generational player moniker, and he hasn't even been close, to be honest. That leaves the Rangers with a very, very bleak future. Unless, of course, the draft is rigged for them again. The Rangers have had some legends pass through the organization, and yet they have struggled to ever win at the highest level. Obviously, acquiring washed-up stars is never the way to win, but in general, spending the most money may not be the way to build the best team either. It worked in the 1920s through 1940s for the Rangers, but has not really worked since.
So, what could my closing thoughts be for this team? Well, if you leave this video with anything, leave it with this. Building a championship team is not just about having the best players. It is also about having the best chemistry as a team. That chemistry usually comes when a young group gets to bond with each other over a long time. You can have great players, but if you just throw them together and give them a season to figure things out, nothing will be accomplished. That is why teams have to draft players to truly win in the end. You can also leave this video knowing that the New York Rangers are the worst of the original 6 teams, because it is funny to hate New York teams.